I'm going to draw a quick picture of the heart, and I expect you to know to draw the picture of the heart and the flow of blood through the heart. So start with the little bird, an Easter egg, another Easter egg, and another bird. Okay, then we have one inverted bird, and there's another inverted bird. Okay, now let's connect the ends. Oops. Divide the ventricles. This one becomes the right side and this becomes the left side. Alright, now let's draw the pulmonary trunk. This becomes the pulmonary trunk. Then you have the left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery. Connect the atria. Okay, this becomes the right atrium, this becomes the left atrium, here becomes the right ventricle, this one becomes the left ventricle, and this separation over here is the interventricular septum. Interventricular septum. Right, now we draw the aorta. The aorta goes up this way and it wraps itself around the pulmonary trunk and it goes down as the descending aorta. So, oops, I'm going to draw this again. Okay. So this becomes the aortic arch. And this area becomes the ascending aorta. This one over here becomes the descending aorta. And then you have three major arteries emerging from the aortic arch. This one over here becomes the brachiocephalic artery. Then you have the left common carotid over here, and this one becomes the left subclavian artery. Alright, now we need some inlets into the atria. So you have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava bringing blood into the right atrium. I'm gonna erase this, okay, because the right atrium is right over here. Okay, and on the left you have the left pulmonary veins that you can see slightly when you're looking at the anterior view of the heart. Okay, so by now I hope you know to label all the major structures. This is the interventricular septum, right ventricle, right atrium, left atrium. This over here is the superior vena cava. In the bottom you have the inferior vena cava that drains blood from the lower extremity. On the left side you have the left pulmonary veins that bring blood from the lungs into the left atria. Now there are four major valves that you need to remember. The atrioventricular valve in between the right atrium and right ventricle is called the tricuspid valve. The atrioventricular valve in between the left atrium and left ventricle is called the bicuspid valve. Okay, So you have the tricuspid valve, and bicuspid valve. Bicuspid valve is also known as the mitral valve. Okay. One of the major arteries that emerges out of the right ventricle and carries blood to the lungs is the pulmonary trunk. So the valve in between the pulmonary trunk and the right ventricle is known as the pulmonary valve. Okay. So we have the pulmonary semilunar valve, also known as just the pulmonary valve. Pulmonary. Pulmonary means the lungs. So any word you see pulmonary will have something to do with the lungs. The pulmonary valve opens up and the blood flows through the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk divides into the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery. Left and right pulmonary artery. And blood reaches the right and left lungs, where it drops off carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen and returns back to the heart via the left and right pulmonary veins. Okay, so this ventricle over here is the left ventricle. A major valve that exits or is present in the left ventricle is the aortic valve. So this valve over here, I'm just gonna highlight this in the red. So this valve in here is the aortic valve. Okay, the aortic valve. Aortic valve or AV. The aortic valve is also known as the aortic semilunar valve because of the shape. So before you go ahead, make sure you know to label all the major parts. This one is the apex. So you see on the top, this top will become the base. Yeah, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava on the right. Left pulmonary artery that you can see on the anterior view. The right pulmonary artery can be seen on the posterior view of the heart. Okay. Then you have the descending aorta, aortic arch, ascending aorta. At the base or the end of the aorta and the left ventricle, right over here, you have the aortic valve. So this one over here becomes the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve on the left side of the heart. On the right side of the heart, you have the tricuspid valve in between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The right ventricle is connected to the pulmonary trunk. The valve in between the two is called the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary valve splits into the left and right pulmonary artery that carry deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Alright, so before you move on, just keep in mind the right side of the heart. The right side of the heart deals with deoxygenated blood. And I'm going to represent deoxygenated blood in blue. The left side of the heart carries oxygenated blood. Okay, because the left side pumps oxygenated blood to the body, whereas the right side pumps deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The pumping chambers are called ventricles. Keep that in mind. Okay, ventricles are the one that do a lot of job over here. Pumping chambers are the ventricles. All right, so let's get started. Starting at the superior and inferior vena cava, we have deoxygenated blood being drained from the upper extremity through the superior vena cava, and from the lower extremity, blood enters the heart through the inferior vena cava. When the right atrium fills up, the atria contracts and the tricuspid valve opens up. Blood flows into the right ventricle. When the ventricle contracts, the pulmonary valve opens up and blood goes through the pulmonary trunk and the left and right pulmonary artery, and it's carried to the lungs for oxygenation. In the lungs, blood drops off carbon dioxide and picks up oxygen. Now the blood returning to the heart will be oxygenated, so we're going to represent it in red. Blood returns to the heart via the left and right pulmonary vein. You see the left pulmonary vein on the anterior view. Blood enters the heart into the left atria. Again, when the atria contracts, the bicuspid or the mitral valve opens up and blood fills up the left ventricle. When the ventricle contracts, the aortic valve opens up and blood enters the aorta. Aorta is the major artery, and oxygenated blood is carried to different parts of the body through aorta. So now blood goes to the body. So this is called systemic circulation, whereas the right side of the heart deals with pulmonary circulation. So remember, when you are starting at the superior and inferior vena cava, the order in which a drop of blood would pass through the heart valve is first tricuspid valve, then you have the pulmonary valve opening up, blood is taken to the lungs, the blood returning to the heart enters through the left pulmonary veins, fills up the left atrium, left and right pulmonary veins, sorry, and fills up the left atrium. The next valve that opens up is bicuspid valve or the mitral valve, and then the left ventricle fills up, oxygenated blood is carried or taken to the aorta when the aortic valve opens up. So now you have a picture of a flow of blood through the heart. It's not pretty, I'm sure, it's better when I draw it on paper. So please know the flow of blood through the heart. Make sure you know to draw the picture, and make sure you know to represent deoxygenated blood in blue and oxygenated blood in red, because that means everything.